Hello and welcome to the Super Canine Show. I'm your host, of course, William Chandler-Duff. Today we're joined by arguably the most highly regarded dog training educator in the world, Michael Ellis. Michael's 40 plus years of experience, as well as his clear, concise, and patient teaching style, have made him one of the most popular dog training educators. Michael, it's a pleasure speaking to you today. And welcome to the Super Canine Show.
Thank you very much, William. It's a pleasure being here.
Wonderful. Michael, I'd like to start at the most fundamental level. How would you articulate your dog training philosophy in a nutshell? Not merely in terms of technique, but in terms of the deeper values and assumptions that guide your decisions when you're working with an animal whose welfare is entirely in your hands.
It's a good question. You dive straight in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the way I look at it is that I treat dogs sort of the way I would want to be treated personally, right? So I look at it as if I'm going to interact with a dog, then before I begin teaching them anything, the dog and I have to have a relationship. I have to find out what makes them tick, what motivates them, what bothers them, etc. And then I try to start to a foundation of relationship that's cooperative, in which it's based on a concept I call engagement, in which the dog is focused on the handler, the owner, for extended periods of time and wants something from you. And once I have that basic piece, I begin to do what I call kind of build the tools that I'm going to use to teach the dog things. So I show them how to be lured and how to be moved around with body pressure. I introduce the leash and show them how to move with the leash. And I introduce our communication system, which is based on the use of markers or conditioned reinforcers and conditioned punishers. And then I begin to construct behavior. And I believe that that you should try to the best of your ability to teach all the initial behaviors with the use of positive reinforcement. And then once the dog begins to understand the behaviors, I think it's also important that the dog understand how to work through some difficulty, the ability to turn off some pressure and the ability to navigate life's inherent difficulties. And then once the dog understands behaviors well and is performing them well, then depending on the individual dog's temperament, I can hold them accountable for doing or not doing things, right? And it's fairness, basically. It's based on a level of fairness. And it's basically based on our ability to kind of stay open to the wide variety of techniques that may be suitable for a different dog, right? So I'm very flexible in kind of how I approach the training based on what the dog's giving me in the moment. And just like in human society, we all have to agree to obey by a group of rules to live in civil society. So do dogs. And some of those dogs move through that process very easily with almost all inducive training, and others require a little more, hey, you have to do this whether you like to or not kind of thing. But I hope that if I've done my job right, communicate clearly, I'm consistent, I teach first, then it's fair to the dog, and the dogs accept it quite nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the central tensions in modern dog training revolves around ethics, specifically how we determine what is morally acceptable and what is not. For trainers who explicitly incorporate aversive stimuli into their practice, the ethical framework is potentially more complex than it is for those who identify as strictly force-free. A force-free trainer can often ground their moral position in a simple axiom: anything is permissible so long as physically aversive stimuli are not intentionally used. So my question is this: where is the actual line in the sand, and what ultimately determines whether a training intervention is ethical or unethical, not ideologically, but functionally and morally?
Right. The issue I have with force-free approach and that idea around ethics and absolutely eschewing the use of any aversive control in your training, anything that's physically or psychologically aversive, even in certain circles they'll talk about, is that I don't think that's the way biology and nature works. And I don't think that's the way living beings are adapted to move through the living world. And I think if you eschew all of those techniques and tools in your training, then you potentially are doing the dog a disservice. You are not preparing the dog for the way the world actually functions. And my experience is that those dogs are more fragile. We see more behavioral issues with dogs that are trained that way than the other way, on balance, right? So certainly poorly used aversive techniques can cause all kinds of problems in dog training, and they
Absolutely.
are potentially ethically reprehensible. But I think when it's done properly, it's not it's not unethical. And I could argue that it's more ethical to prepare the dog for the world in which they're going to live. And I would argue that some small amounts of aversive control done appropriately at the right time actually broaden a dog's ability to engage in the world. And those dogs have fuller, richer lives because of the situations that they can be put into later. They have more freedom. They can be off leash in a wider variety of areas. They can explore their dogness to a greater degree than dogs that have to be limited because somebody decided to draw an arbitrary line in the sand about what technique they're willing to use. And to your question about the line in the sand portion, I think it's a moving line, right? It depends on a wide variety of factors: the dog, the owner, the community in which it lives in, the temperament of that dog, like safety issues. There's a whole host of things that come in. We're not just talking about the ethical welfare as it pertains to the dog. We're talking about ethical welfare as it pertains to the society, to owners, neighbors, people, and other dogs that you'll encounter out in the world. And we have to take into account the safety and well-being of the whole community. And so I would say the situation can move that ethical line one direction or another based on a variety of variables.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good answer to the question. Despite the differences, there are many highly competent trainers who deliberately choose not to use physically aversive stimuli.
Absolutely.
Who are some trainers in that camp whose work you genuinely respect, and what do you think they get right, even if you don't fully share their methodology?
So Denise Fenzi is a friend of mine that I've known for, probably 25 years. And Denise has deliberately chosen, for instance, to eschew the use of physically aversive stimuli in her training, or to limit it as much as absolutely possible. She's also interested, I think, in getting dogs to do things, and is making an effort to get her dogs out into competitive circles and things like that are challenging. She works with dogs that of temperament types that can be difficult sometimes to manage in the world with in a force-free paradigm. So I think she's really done a lot to move those techniques forward and to popularize them and to spread them, which I think is a lovely thing, right? So I'm in no way opposed to people making an effort to do that. And I would like to be able to have a reasoned discussion about where that works and where I think it might not work, where it's helpful to the dog, and where we might actually be doing the dog a disservice, like I talked about before. But I think Denise is doing a lovely job there and trying super hard to stay in that lane. And I think the better trainers in that world, the ones with the more skill, right, that are actually achieving some results and things like that, and are working dogs on a regular basis, tend not to be such vocal critics of what we would call these days more balanced training, right? They look at it like, hey, there are skilled trainers on both sides of this argument, and you don't see them being quite as dogmatic about some of the other trainers or the other training methodologies out there. Whereas I think the loudest voices in the force-free community, and sometimes to a degree the loudest voices in the balance training community are looking at it like a religious discussion in a sense, right? They're super dogmatic. They're very tied to their ideas, and they're not willing to open their mind to evidence to the contrary. And they will do everything possible not to take on information. But most of those people also, I don't think, are putting their hands on lots of different types of dogs and training them to do a wide variety of different types of disciplines, right? They kind of stay in their little community and live with dogs in a very specific way, and aren't willing to kind of venture out of that, which I think it doesn't move the whole industry and doesn't move our whole understanding of dogs forward at all, right?
Definitely. I think there are some huge benefits for some of those trainers who take on the challenge to train dogs without the use of aversive stimuli. I mean, that's there are definitely some benefits that come out of that for everyone else.
Yeah, agreed. Like, and there was a period certainly in my career when I was first exposed to detailed reward-based training, like my early experiences in that world were super exciting. Like coming from a very traditional background. I mean, I've been dog training for 45 years, right? And so in those early days, it was certainly a very different ball of wax than it is now, right? And so when I was first exposed in the late 1980s to what I call the beginnings of the reward-based revolution, right? People like Karen Pryor and Gary Wilkes and other usually exotic animal trainers were traveling and giving seminars to dog trainers about the use of a clicker and a whole host of things. It was a crazy exciting time. And lots of trainers that I worked with, we kind of embraced that. And I went through a period in a career where we did our very best to do as much as possible without the use of any aversive control, right? We were trying to do force-free dog training at that time. And it was a huge growth experience for all of us. We learned different ways to interact with dogs, communicate with dogs. We began to find other ways to manipulate motivation. And there's all kinds of things that we learned about dog training that moved the whole industry forward. After a period of time in that world, you also began to see the limits of that, right? Especially if you wanted dogs that could function in a really wide, dogs of a wide variety of temperaments to be able to function in a wide variety of environments, right? And I began to see also to some degree that if you weren't very careful or you didn't have just the right kind of dog, you also might be building some fragility in the dogs, right? As a result of that. And I honestly believe that sheltering a dog too much from stressful experiences makes a fragile creature. And there's, just like for human beings, there's small doses of stress properly metered at various times in your development actually make you more resilient to stress later on. You bounce back better, you handle difficulty better, all those sorts of things. And I determined early on that I felt that it was better that we proctor those experiences instead of life just throw them at you, that we structure them as a part of a dog rearing program. Because then we could control when it happened developmentally. We could control the intensity of the stimuli. We could be put in a position to help the dog manage it well. Whereas if you wait for the world to kind of throw those things at you, then maybe it's more intense than you wanted. Maybe it's unpredictable. Maybe you're not prepared to deal with it in the moment. And so you get much more variable results. And maybe it doesn't happen for the dog at the right time in their development either, right? And so I think after very committed period of time of trying to do that work with other trainers that had very good physical skills as well, we realized the limitations. And then we began to look for, okay, what's the best of this? And what's the best of more traditional techniques? And how might we merge those worlds? And that has been the evolution. I spent early in my seminar career, before I run a school for dog trainers for the last 16 years. And before that, I traveled for close to 15 years, giving seminars to dog clubs and dog organizations. And very early on in that seminar career, I was traveling around to very traditional dog training organizations and teaching them about the use of rewards. Right? I was a huge proponent for the use of positive reinforcement and telling traditional trainers, hey, there's another way you can do this, right? And over time, the reward-based revolution comes on, and I think we swung out of balance the other direction, right? People got super dogmatic about this idea that the use of any aversive control is inherently unethical and abusive, and which just isn't true in my opinion. And so now I find myself kind of advocating more than I might want to for the use of aversive control in our training to some degree, because I think we're out of balance a little bit in that mentality, and people have to recognize, hey, there's a sweet spot in here, right? You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and while keeping all the good stuff that we have from the reward-based revolution.
Absolutely. Let's move into more difficult territory. If a trainer has committed themselves to completely avoiding physically aversive stimuli, but is then confronted with a dog exhibiting genuinely dangerous or otherwise profoundly maladaptive behavior, and they are unable to achieve meaningful change, what is the ethical course of action? Specifically, is it morally defensible for such a trainer to recommend, say, psychopharmacological interventions like SSRIs or even behavioral euthanasia before consulting or referring to someone who can competently and judiciously employ aversive tools as part of a broader behavior modification strategy?
I don't think so. Yeah, my opinion is that behavioral euthanasia certainly, and the use of medication to some degree, to a lesser degree, are not justified unless you've kind of moved your way through more traditional interventions, right? And there are plenty of very talented, very experienced, balanced trainers, and I'm using this term because it's kind of the acceptable term these days, right?
I use the term as well. I know some people have a problem with the term.
Yeah, I have a little difficulty about it. Sometimes it's a little polluted in that some people just are advocating using it as a way to advocate for very high pressure aversive training, with kind of paying lip service to the use of rewards in their training. But I don't think that's true balance training. So when I talk about that, I mean people that really are trying to find the right balance point for a given dog. There are loads of talented people out there, and they achieve regularly exceptional results with dogs that are in the pipeline for euthanasia and medication, that have been reared in environments and have been subjected to kind of force-free protocols that didn't solve the problem. And so I think it is, I think it's unethical to recommend, certainly it's unethical to recommend behavioral euthanasia before attempted balance training solutions. And in certain cases, medication as well. It depends on the behavior problem. Medication has a role, a big role in helping with certain types of behavior problems, but it needs to be done with a behavior modification plan and with a plan for hopefully getting the dog off the medication over time, right? Which isn't the case a lot.
Yeah. Well, that definitely leads us into our next question, which is on medication. In your work with behavior modification, do you use or do you support the use of SSRI medications? And if so, how do you conceptualize their mechanism within a training framework? Specifically, in which types of cases do you think SSRIs meaningfully improve training outcomes? And where do you see clear limits to what these medications can and cannot address?
So let me first state that I'm not an expert in the use of medication. I'm not a veterinarian, and I'm not a veterinary behaviorist. And so there are people out there that have a much more thorough understanding of the medications and how they work, but I'm familiar enough with their use. I personally don't use them and have not had to use them in my behavior modification work over the years. But I know a lot of trainers that do in very specific situations, especially, for instance, separation anxiety, and kind of limiting rehearsal of destructive, self-destructive behavior in the early stages of behavior mod protocols for separation anxiety. SSRIs have shown to be really beneficial in that process. And there's some kind of laid out protocols for doing that. The issue is, for me, is that very few people are using medications in conjunction with behavioral solutions as well. And it becomes very easy to continue to leave the dogs on medication. And none of these medications have been studied for their long-term effects on dogs' health and well-being, right? So they're not even designed for dogs, actually. And certainly in the United States, there's really no research on there. And there's many side effects. We all know that there are lots of side effects in certain cases, and you don't know how a specific dog's going to respond to them until you get into the work, right? And so I know aggression cases that are made worse by SRSRIs and some others that are helped, right? So I would suggest that anybody considering their use certainly do a little bit of research, consult veterinarians, and don't put dogs on the medication without some behavioral modification program in place as well, some training stuff happening as well. And then make sure that whatever protocol you has a plan to limit their use or remove the dogs from the medications at some point. And I think kind of drugging a dog for the rest of its life potentially is unethical, right?
Absolutely.
In a sense, right?
Yeah. Understanding that there can be some serious side effects to these medications, and taking them off of the medications is not a precise science. Nobody actually really knows exactly how to take them off the medications.
Agreed.
It's a bit of a guessing game.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is a very interesting one, and it's certainly not something that I'm recommending to anyone, but it's more of a theoretical discussion, and it's related to its medication as well. This is on psychedelics. There are some controlled animal studies, particularly in mice, showing that certain psychedelics like psilocybin can significantly alter fear processing. In these models, a single exposure appears to enhance fear extinction and promote neuroplastic changes in brain regions involved in learning and emotional regulation. What are your thoughts on psychedelics, and do you think they should be explored in canine behavior modification?
I think they absolutely should be, and I think they absolutely should be also and they are now in human psychology as well, right? So there's all kinds of work now being done on PTSD and a variety of other things in the potential use of psychedelics to help with that process. So, like, I'm a huge proponent of research into anything that might help dogs or people, right? And so I don't have any personal experience with giving psychedelics to animals, but I have heard the same thing you had about some of the rodent studies and things like that, which is intriguing, right? Especially anything that could be like a single treatment or a single dose that might improve an animal or person's fear processing. That's exciting, right? As opposed to kind of long-term drug therapy stuff. And so, sure, looking into it sounds like a great idea to me, right?
But just for everybody listening, neither Michael or me are recommending that you give psychedelics to your dogs. No. But it would be interesting to look into it further on the scientific side of things. Definitely.
I agree. I think there's so much stigma around psychedelics, leftover stigma from generations ago, right? In that sense, and the point at which they got lumped in with a lot of other drugs that had super problematic effects for humans, and because of that, all research stopped on the use of psychedelics, and at times when there were very promising research in human psychology on the use of psychedelics, and our kind of cultural values inhibited that, and it stopped for a large period of time. And I think we're at a tipping point where that's coming back and some of the stigma is going away. And to me, that's useful. Science, I mean, I don't want to place a lot of limits on what scientists can explore. That's how we make breakthroughs, right? And if we just decide, hey, we can't look into this anymore because of our societal values, then we may be shooting ourselves in the foot. So anything to encourage research into something that might help dogs, I'm into, right?
Absolutely. Before any real learning can take place and before you even begin to address problematic behavior, what steps do you take as a dog trainer to establish a trustworthy and constructive relationship with a dog? Like how do you think that early relational work sets the stage for behavior modification and long-term learning?
I mean, I think it's essential, right? So I don't think any real good behavior modification program can move forward, or even most just general dog training programs can't move forward well without a relationship, a solid relationship. And that relationship has to have a variety of components. One piece is just familiarity, right? Dogs, like humans, are a little treat strangers and people that they don't know well or they're unfamiliar with differently, right? You're on edge, you're careful a little bit, you're cautious about the unknown, right? So there's just a basic idea of, hey, let the dog get used to me and get to know me first, so they're familiar with me, and that process can be shorter or longer depending on the genetic temperament of the dog, right? So if I have a very sensitive, under socialized dog, that just basic trust and familiarity process may take a little bit of time for that dog to get used to me and recognize me and not be petrified of me, as it were, right? I always try to facilitate this process with the use of positive reinforcement, right? So anytime I'm working with a new dog, immediately I do a series of diagnostic things to basically tell me what makes this dog tick. What do they like and what do they don't like? How are they in the world? What are their thresholds for stimulation? What are their thresholds for environmental stress? What are the thresholds for defensive stress? All the basic ideas about what makes the dog tick. I try to find out things that the dog likes. Is it playful? Is it interested in chasing? Does it have predatory behavior? What's its food motivation like, etc.? Can I manipulate that kind of stuff? And so there's a period of kind of playing around, I like to say, or I just kind of mess around with the dog and I get to know each other a little bit. And in this process, I'm trying to figure out what you like and don't like and how I might move forward through this process. And as soon as I think the dog starts to trust me and I know what the dog I can use to motivate the dog, all the initial work is done through the use of positive reinforcement primarily, right? So I'm basically rewarding the dog for paying attention to me, and I'm beginning to teach them how to move and follow rewards, all the things that I'm going to do to create behavior, and then we just move forward from there. Also, I would say, for me personally, play is a huge part of my relationship with dogs, right? I'm kind of obsessed with it. I've been doing it a long time. I think it's amazingly powerful. And so if the dog has any interest in playing at all, then that's a huge window into our relationship. And I'll immediately begin to lean into that. So almost every dog I work with, if they have the propensity to play, I'm going to try to develop that and use it as a part of my training.
Beautiful. That's definitely the way you should start with your relationship with a dog before you dive into the proper dog training.
Yeah, so I think it was a huge light bulb for me, right? So when I came up in dog training, the first thing you did when you encountered a dog, you went to an obedience class or you got a new dog in, is you put a leash on the dog and you started trying to get it to do things, right? There was no discussion about whether the dog, you needed a relationship. You certainly weren't using rewards to manipulate the dog. And it was messy, right? And if you were good at that type of work and you were consistent and all the things, many dogs got trained that way, right? And many dogs were fine after that, right? But it's not ideal. The dogs go through more stress than they need to. Things are sloppier and less clear. All kinds of stuff about that was not ideal. And when I learned basically to say hey, spend as much time up front getting the dog's head right to learn, getting them in the right state of mind to take in the information you want, and spending a little time on just manipulating them without the goal of creating very specific behaviors, then when you got to the behavior creation portion, where I actually wanted to teach them to do stuff, it went really smoothly with very little stress, as opposed to if you just jump straight in and try to, it takes more time a little bit, but I think it saves time in the long run, right? You're not having to go back and patch things up that you made a hash of when you rushed through the early stuff, right?
Definitely. All right, now I want to address a conceptual issue that is both technically important and widely misunderstood. For many individuals, there exists a substantial confusion about what precisely constitutes punishment and how it differs from negative reinforcement. Frankly, I think that confusion is understandable because the distinction is neither intuitive nor often articulated with sufficient precision. Both rely on aversive stimuli as their motivational engine. So how do you distinguish functionally between positive punishment and negative reinforcement?
Quick pause for a second. If you're enjoying this episode so far, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed to the channel. Leave a comment as well and share it with someone. Share is really important because we want this episode to go out to as many people as possible to educate people on the intricacies and details and everything dog training and dog related. So subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, share it with a friend who you know would love the episode. Okay, back to the show.
So I'm going to come at this from a kind of roundabout way and talk about operant conditioning in general and how we conceptualize it, right? And so I think when I learned about the four quadrants of operant conditioning and our lovely little square, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment, like many dog trainers, I was exposed to it, and we broke it in half based on the giving and withholding of rewards and the pressure-based aspects of it. So people said, hey, we lump positive reinforcement and negative punishment in together, right? The giving and withholding of rewards to affect behavior. And then we lump the traditional dog training quadrants in together, negative reinforcement and positive punishment, or escape and avoidance training in together, right? And I think over the years, I've come to think that that's incorrect, right? We should be thinking about it from the perspective of reinforcement creates behavior and makes behavior more likely. So the two forms of reinforcement I put in one side, and punishment stops or reduces behavior and makes behavior less likely. And I put the two forms of punishment together, right? And so when we talk about negative reinforcement and positive punishment, I think good trainers and even neurobiologists at this point don't particularly like the distinction between negative punishment and positive punishment, right? Basically, where punishment is punishment on a certain level, and it alters behavior because dogs don't like it, right? This happens to you, you're not happy about it, and if it's aversive enough to you, and aversive can be physically aversive, it can also be psychologically aversive. And if you really want something badly and you don't get it, neurobiologically, the same stuff happens when something unpleasant physically happens to you, right? And so punishment, I think some of the distinction we make between different types of punishment, negative punishment and positive punishment, are a little bit semantic, right? In a practical way, we're talking about the same thing. But the negative reinforcement, positive punishment paradigm, negative reinforcement is where the discomfort, or psychological or physical, widely variable in terms of degree, is exerted on an organism, and the organism does something that allows it to escape or stop that discomfort, and whatever behavior escaped or stopped that thing has been reinforced, and that behavior becomes a go-to in those circumstances, right? And punishment is a consequence, something that happens after a behavior that the dog associates with that behavior, and then it makes that behavior less likely. And so nobody creates behavior with punishment. You create behavior with the two forms of reinforcement, positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and you stop behavior with punishment. And that's the distinction, right? And I also like to say sometimes if people are familiar with the escape and avoidance paradigm, that negative reinforcement is the escape portion, and positive punishment is part of the avoidance paradigm. You learn to avoid a consequence by doing or not doing something, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, the key functional difference between negative reinforcement and punishment lies in escapability. Mm-hmm. That is, that negative reinforcement is by definition escapable. The organism learns how to terminate or avoid the aversive stimulus through a specific behavior. Punishment, by contrast, is its conceptual opposite.
That's a great way of looking at it. I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, there's what should I call it? There's a chapter in operant behavior areas of research and application in 1966. It's a really good read, actually, by Nathan Azrin and William Holmes. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they identified several parameters necessary for effective punishment, and one of them was that it should be inescapable. I mean, the parameters were like intensity, immediacy, an initial continuous schedule, and critically, it was the absence of escape.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, which also makes perfect sense, right? So consistency being a key component there, right?
Yeah, I mean they didn't formally include inescapability in their definition of punishment, but they clearly recognized it as one of its most powerful components.
Right. There's also, I think, something interesting now that almost all research, and it's highly limited in terms of actual practical functional research on dog training and dog training methodologies, but the research on the use of punishment and reinforcement was frequently done with unsignaled punishment, right? And most of the dog training history is done with unsignaled punishment as well, right? And so I think in modern dog training, we've come to realize, just like signaling reinforcement, the use of markers, conditioned reinforcers, et cetera, in our training, that there are super highly powerful things about signaling outcomes to dogs. And signaling punishment is a big one, right? Which kind of changes that paradigm, right? A little bit, in that if I've constructed a conditioned punisher, I can construct a conditioned punisher through the use of negative punishment and or positive punishment, right? And if the dog understands that, then the sound itself has punishing effects. And I can actually downregulate or defer or omit actual physical punishment in my training because of the conditioned punishment's effect on behavior, right? Which is a big deal, right? For us, and it allows a whole host of other things to happen that we could not do in the past, or we potentially was fraught in the past by using direct punishment, direct positive punishment, typically. Also helps us apply negative punishment in places where we couldn't because of what I call the credit assignment problem, meaning timing is problematic when using negative punishment. How do I make the dog associate the fact that they didn't get something they want with a very specific behavior in a wide variety of training situations, right? It's kind of easy in certain specific training situations and not so easy in others, right? And the use of a signaled punisher is super helpful in that process, what I call assigning credit. And we do that for rewards, right? I can defer primary reinforcement through the use of a conditioned reinforcer, right? So I signal a reward, and the actual primary reward can come significantly later and solve the credit assignment problem, as it were. The dog knows what the reinforcement is for, what the reward is for. And I think having that ability with punishment really helps clean up the communication and prevent fallout
Right. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that clears up some of the confusion. I mean, you see these constant posts on social media of people just getting really confused, and it's certainly understandable.
Yeah.
Between negative reinforcement and punishment, and yeah, that clears up the confusion. It's negative reinforcement should be escapable, punishment should be inescapable. I think that's one of the key components of the two, and what separates them. And really, it's just that punishment is the polar opposite of reinforcement.
It is, exactly. Reinforcement creates behavior, strengthens behavior. Punishment reduces or stops behavior, right? So, like, nobody teaches with punishment, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You work with dogs that have to perform under massive distraction, gunfire, decoys, crowds, etc. How do you attempt to make behaviors resilient enough so that they hold up in those environments?
So it starts from the very beginning of developing a dog, right? So I am a huge proponent of preparing dogs from puppyhood for the world in which they're going to have to live. And for my dogs, that's a sport world, protection sport disciplines, and as well as their companion dogs and pets. Right. So my dogs live in my house and sleep in my bed and go hiking with me, in addition to doing very challenging working dog sports. So it starts from the very beginning, and it begins with proper exposure to the world. It begins to developing behavior and channeling genetic propensities into the behaviors that we want: play and biting and reinforcement of obedience behaviors from early on in our work. That once that gets solid, it needs to be transferred to different environments. And inherent in all of that is that if I'm preparing the dog for a world in which there will be deliberate stressors placed on the dog, which is true of any working dog discipline, doesn't matter what it is, right? Then it is my job to proctor experiences that allow the dog to win in those environments. So I put the dogs starting from young in the early stages. You put them in very small amounts of difficulty with a clear path to winning, and they win. They work through. They resolve it. They get stronger. They get better. They get eventually oblivious to what might have been a stressor at a certain point in their life, and you build on that. And it's systematic desensitization to a lot of things in those processes. The genetics of the dog play a large role, right? You need a dog that wants to do these types of activities on some base level, and is genetically confident enough to overcome some of the difficulties. And there are limits, certainly, on how far you can take a dog based on their genetics. But it's really a step-by-step process from 8 weeks old all the way up to competition or application. And just like a companion dog should be prepared for the difficulties that they might encounter in their life, right? A working dog has a different set of difficulties, but they need to be prepared in a very incremental and thoughtful fashion through the whole way.
Definitely. Could you expand a little bit on what you mean by systematic desensitization, just for those listeners who aren't aware of the technical jargon?
Right. So, for instance, I'll take as an example one of the sports that I compete in, the decoy, who is the bad guy. So these are protection disciplines that were designed originally to select dogs for police and military work. They became stylized and turned into sports in the very early 1900s. And they've been going ever since, and they've been evolving, etc. And so now there are all these civilian dog sports. Most of them were developed in Western Europe, in Germany, France, Belgium, Holland. And most of these disciplines have some protection discipline They have obedience and agility and search work, and then they have some form of protection. And in the sport that I do, the decoy is wearing a big padded suit, and he has a kind of split bamboo stick. And the stick is what the decoy is going to use to attempt to intimidate the dog, right? And you're basically testing the dog's ability to work through that difficulty. This guy's going to act aggressively with this stick, and there's prescribed ways in which the decoy can hit the dog with the stick. He can't hit him in the face and things like that. So there's ways that protect the dog's physical well-being, but exert psychological and small amounts of physical pressure on the dog to make sure that they're suitable to do this discipline. If I want dogs for police and military applications, breeders need to be able to create these dogs. So there's a nutshell kind of encapsulation. So one of the key oppositional forces or difficulties my dog might face is this bamboo stick that is being wielded by the guy. So starting from puppyhood, I may have a young puppy that's being held on a harness by me or an owner, and I may have a little tug or a rag on the end of a string, and I'm teaching that puppy to chase it and bite it like playing tug of war games. And in the act of having him chase and bite that tug, in the background, I'm kind of rattling this stick. So I make the stick make a noise, and then they get to chase and bite the little rag, yay, which they like a lot, right? And then I move the stick around a little bit, and then they get to chase and bite the rag. And then gradually I'm swinging the stick over the top of them while they're doing this. And then they get to win and carry their little rag or tug around. And you build on that a little bit at a time. So over the course of the dog's life, that work becomes more and more vigorous. And what could be a stressor to a dog becomes an excitatory stimulus. The dog's like, "Ooh, I hear that stick. I see that stick. It means I get to engage in this activity that I really enjoy." And we desensitize them to it till eventually somebody could be waving the stick really vigorously and really threateningly. They could even hit the dog across the back and shoulders with the stick, and the dog would be like, "Yeah, whatever. Doesn't bother me at all." Right. And they're very willing to engage in it. And you could actually say that they'll even be willing to seek it out, that the stick starts to be in Pavlovian arousal cue, and the dogs get excited by it, etc. And so that would be a classic example. Gunfire, another classic example, right? So from puppyhood, we start off with gunfire far away from the puppies during feeding time. So I'll have a bunch of puppies out, and at feeding time, they're getting all excited. And so I have somebody 100 meters away shoot off a gun, and then boom, I put their food down and they all dive in, and we gradually build that and incorporate it till somebody could stand in front of the dog and shoot a gun off, and the dogs are like, yeah, whatever, right? So that's a classic example of kind of systematic desensitization. And we do this with lots of things in the dog's life. We teach them about being on slippery surfaces and enclosed spaces, and that's all done in incremental steps with highly valuable positive reinforcers on the other side, right? And then there comes a point, of course, in any of that where if the dog has never been bothered by any of it, then they may not be resilient to something they're bothered by, right? So there's stages, and the place is different for different dogs as they're growing, in which we deliberately make it a little bit stressful for the dog, right? I can prevent the dog from having any stress if I'm super incremental about how I introduce things. But there is a point in my dog's development where I think I kind of have enough in the tank that I want the dog to be stressed a little bit. I don't want you to be terrified or anything, but I want them to be a little like, oh, and then have them work through it and come out on the other side and win. And so we set up these circumstances deliberately at various points where the dog can be put in small amounts of difficulty that they overcome. And over time, that makes it harder to put those dogs in difficulty, right?
UK, we've the government has announced I don't know if you know about this, but they've announced another consultation into banning electric collars. One of the main reasons why we want electric collars to continue to be allowed in the UK is to prevent attacks on livestock and predatory behavior in general.
It's unfortunate you guys are facing another round of this on the attempts to ban electronic collars. I think it's a huge disservice to the dog community as a whole, right? And so I know that there are going to be a lot of people out there that have a different opinion on this, but for me, certainly, proper use of an electronic collar with education and stuff like that has the ability to radically improve the lives of many dogs beyond just protecting livestock in emergency situations, right? It's much.
So these are definitely the main situations. It's like a dog that's chasing livestock, and a dog that's chasing livestock, or a dog that's chasing cars, or a dog that's chasing any animals.
And certainly,
this is the main place where we need electric collars. We absolutely need them.
Yeah, we would, but I would argue. I agree with you 100%. That's a huge deal, right? But on top of that, I would argue that some appropriate use of an electronic collar as part of the dog's development, integrated into their training, also opens up a huge amount of enrichment possibilities for dogs that aren't there.
Absolutely.
If you can't do that, right? So having a dog off leash to be able to hike and run and be a dog and do that safely, like for their safety, for the safety of livestock and wildlife and other people and their dogs, etc., require reliable recalls in order to do that. And if you don't have that, then you have to avoid certain environments, and dogs have impoverished lives as a result of that, right? The more places I can take my dog safely, the more places the dog can be off leash to run free and be dogs, right? We can, in urban areas, especially in suburban areas, we control their lives so much. They live in a very artificial world compared to their canine ancestors, and I think that's a shame, right? And so that tool, used correctly, really opens up an entire world for those dogs and actually improves canine well-being, I think, right?
It definitely is a shame. I mean, hopefully it doesn't come into it doesn't become law. I mean, last time, we had a consultation before, and it didn't end up materializing, but
right.
They seem to be constantly wanting to push this, and it's
the low-hanging fruit for people that have a kind of force-free agenda, right? If you don't know anything about the tool, right? You call it a shock collar. People have a wild misconception about what a modern e-collar is and how it's used when it's used appropriately. They really don't understand it. So if you talk to somebody that doesn't understand anything about behavior or dog training or what that tool is, then of course it seems logical you shouldn't be running around shocking dogs, right? Like,
it's certainly a good way to political brownie points.
Yeah. So I think the repeated efforts to ban the tool, meaning it's just the easiest one to sell to people that are uneducated about it, right? Because it's, if I didn't know anything about it and somebody said it, I'm like, yeah, why would I use an electric collar on my dog, kind of thing? But people really don't have any concept of how it's used and how it's used properly and what the sensation's like and how it's introduced, and they don't know anything about the tool. And so it's an education problem in my mind, ultimately, right? Like many things.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, what would be your advice to trainers and just people in general, not necessarily even dog trainers, but just people in countries like the UK or other countries that want to fight back against a ban on the electric collar? What would be your advice to people like this?
I would say it's about education, right? So
right.
I would come up with video and presentational resources on the tool with loads of examples of it being introduced properly, used properly. The more examples we have of dogs living full lives, showing their responses to a variety of training situations, showing the dogs interacting and hiking and out in the world. And then we use these to create presentations for lawmakers, etc. Right? And so there's loads of real world examples to show people. And then also my mission has been for many years now education of the general public about what dog training is and what it constitutes, right? Lots of
Right.
people beyond the e-collar, that's not just the electronic collar, people have no conception of what dog training actually is. The average person doesn't, right? And so it's remarkable, and I don't know what the numbers are in Europe, but in the US, half the households have dogs, right? Like, they're ubiquitous. They're such a huge portion of our cultural identity.
I think it's an even higher level of households in countries like, the UK, it's certainly going to be a higher level of households than even the US in terms of how many households have dogs.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And in that, I don't know about the UK either, but certainly in the US, there's no part of, you can't move through your life without encountering dogs in society. It's not physically possible. And so I think there should be like some basic behavior training stuff happening as a part of the school system ultimately, right? It's like at the basis level. And the more people kind of see real dog training, go out, put their hands on dogs, kind of understand what that is, the better off we are. The harder it is to make these kind of sensationalistic statements about certain tools. Yes, any tool can be abused, right? Anything you put on a dog can be abusive, right? My hands and feet can be abusive, right? So to me, the idea that the electronic collar has some special status as a dog abusing tool is kind of nuts, actually. And my personal experiences in dealing with the average person in the US is that people are worried about somebody just being able to buy one of these things and use it incorrectly. Most of the dog owners that I encounter are reluctant to use it, and they're very careful, right? The average person is not out there going like, oh, yay, I get to put an e-collar on my dog. I have to actually convince them in certain cases that, hey, it's not what you think it is. You got to, it's okay. The dog's fine. Trust me, that whole thing. And so like, there's not a epidemic of people out there buying electronic collars and abusing dogs. It's just a myth.
Why do you think dog training has become so polarized between methods?
I think maybe for a lot of the same reasons that our political discourse is so polarized and things like that, right? I think part of it is the internet, honestly, and social media. You get attention for sensationalistic, controversial statements, and our whole kind of discourse these days is driven by trying to get attention in the world and driving eyeballs to things. And there's actually monetization of eyeballs and interaction. And good dog training, like good dog training, is undramatic, right? It's slow, steady, consistent, not particularly sensational stuff. But who wants to watch that? That's not going to draw a lot of eyeballs. So you say something outrageous or very much an extreme viewpoint on one side or the other, and it creates interaction. Like some people get behind it, some people get angry at it, and then you have all this interaction, which feeds the algorithm in a sense, right? When I came up in dog training, even at the beginnings of the what I say the reward-based revolution, when these discussions were starting to happen, it was pre the internet and pre any of that kind of stuff, and I didn't feel that. And in person with dog trainers, very rarely when I go out in person and actually train with people, like we're all out on a field together, putting our hands on dogs, that dichotomy doesn't exist there. People aren't, all the vitriol and all the kind of entrenched dogma is not a part of that. And people will say things and do things on the internet that they would never do in person. And so, as much as the internet has been a wonderful thing for our ability to disseminate information and a kind of equalizer potentially in access to educational materials, it's also driving a lot of this polarized discourse, I think.
Definitely.
That's an old man take on it.
Well, my dog training is very dramatic, Michael. Let's see, what's our next question? Let's find the next question for you. We've got to pick your brain. What advice would you give to young trainers? Or not necessarily young trainers. I mean, that's
new trainers.
Beginning
trainers just starting beginning.
Trainers who just started into dog training. It's their first year wanting to become a dog trainer. What advice would you give?
One, I would say, I would encourage you strongly to get out into the world of working dog disciplines or competitive dog disciplines, clubs and hobbyists out there, because there's a big community of people that for a long time have been doing lots of stuff with dogs. And that world has a little bit less of an agenda in terms of selling you stuff, right? It's a non-commercial, although it's being commercialized world. And a lot of highly skilled trainers have been training dogs as a hobby for a long time. So dip your toe in that world if it's available to you, even if you just hang out and watch and ask questions, etc., in those circumstances. And then if you find someone or some idea or some methodologies or some philosophical camp that appeals to you, then dive in and stay the course for a bit, right? There's a little bit of a paralysis for new dog trainers of excessive information. So here I'm going to bash the internet again, but
learning from lots of multiple sources, right?
Yeah, so it's very easy to go out and get access to a lot of conflicting information right now, which can be super confusing if you're starting. So when you dive into a world and some philosophy that makes sense to you, kind of tune out some of the noise for a little bit and just focus on it, right? And focus on messing with that thing and stay in the course long enough to find out what makes that kind of approach tick. The other thing is you need to put your hands on a lot of dogs, like a lot of different kinds of dogs, right? So not just the type that you're used to. And a lot of beginning trainers struggle with that, finding ways to actually put their hands on different dogs and play with them and mess around with them and that kind of stuff. Be less concerned with documenting stuff and more concerned with kind of doing stuff. I think my good friend Ivan Balabanov and I had a discussion about this. We've had several discussions about this, but this idea that at the time we came up in dog training, everything you did wasn't for public consumption, meaning it all wasn't being posted and put out in front of everybody all the time and commented on.
Well, so there was no social media.
No, nothing. Yeah, right? No internet, no social media. And so what happened is you went to dog clubs or you went to a seminar or whatever that was, and you saw some techniques or heard an idea, and then you went back to your friends in your training group and you messed around with it. And you tried some stuff and it didn't work, or you failed at it and this thing. But all that was done not with public scrutiny and comment, right? These days, like you do anything and you're going to have 20 people jumping all over you like, what an idiot kind of nonsense, right? So that's a hard environment to grow in. Like to grow in any aspect of your life, you have to be able to fail and try again. Like life is just a whole series of iterations. You mess with things, you run up against the difficulty, you face plant, you get up, you try another way, you do it and you figure it out, right? And now that's all being watched and commented on for a lot of young trainers.
People are unbelievably nasty on social media.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. And it's unrealistic on both sides of the spectrum, meaning like I use social media because it's the only way to talk to a certain group of people these days.
We all have to use social media. As dog trainers, we have to.
Yeah, we're painted into a corner on this front. But honestly, I do not read the comments to anything I put up of any kind. Really? I don't engage with them. I don't even look at them. Not at all. The good ones or the bad ones, right? it all is an unrealistic view of how you should move through your world, right? Here's a whole bunch of people saying lovely things about you. What that goes to your head, makes you feel like, hey, you know more than you do, like all that stuff. Like, yeah, it's lovely to have people say nice things about you, but
and then there's a whole lot of people saying nasty things, really horrible things towards you.
Yep. And then people criticizing you, and then it's hard not to take that on board if you keep looking at that. And then you're going to want to get pulled into these discussions. And for me, there's a directly inverse relationship between how much somebody posts on social media and comments on social media and how much dog training they're doing. The best dog trainers in the world, which I am friends with many of them, in my opinion, the people that are very highly skilled and been doing this for a long time, they spend zero time on social media commenting and writing and arguing with people. They don't do that. They're out there training dogs to do stuff. They're interacting with dogs. And you look at some of the stuff that happens on the internet, and that's somebody's full-time job. They're sitting there running around the internet, commenting on everybody's stuff and criticizing somebody or whatever that is, creating these long, when do you have time to actually put your hands on some dogs in there, right? And dog training at the end of the day is a practical discipline. We can talk about theory until we're blue in the face.
Exceptional when there's a camera in front of them,
right? Yeah. And honestly, I can say my most transcendent moments in dog training, you're seeking this kind of flow state, right? Yeah. There's this place where you and the dog we click, everything's going smoothly together. It's like a dance. It's just the world disappears. You're in this perfect place, right? That rarely happens when you're trying to show somebody something or in front of the camera. That mostly happens when I'm alone in a field somewhere with my dog, right? And that's the heart of the whole thing, right?
And then afterwards,
that's what it's about.
Oh, if there was a camera there, that would be so good, and it would be amazing. But it's just different when there's a camera in front of you. Everything 100%. Changes.
And I have a personal mission right now because in my little mini one-man effort to combat this is I have a video training journal for my current dog, right? So from 8 weeks, and he's 2.5 now, I've been recording. It's just been incredibly challenging for me, all of his training sessions, right? And so I've recorded probably 95% of his training sessions, and in their entirety, no editing whatsoever, all the stuff I'm doing ahead of time, what I'm doing in the session, what I do right after the session, all the downtime in the middle of the sessions, whatever that is, in their entirety, and then voicing them over afterwards and putting them into kind of a video diary. And it's dog training kind of in real time, not chopped up in these little bits, which gives you kind of a really inaccurate view of the actual flow of dog training. But it also shows all the mistakes, which are, I would argue, more important for people to see than everything going perfectly. Like me putting up a bunch of videos of dogs that already do stuff, or this training session going absolutely perfectly with somebody, doesn't really help people that are learning to do this. What helps people is watching mistakes happen and how you recover from the mistakes and the struggles that you go through when you're trying to get something. And trainers these days, because everything is being watched and judged nonstop, are afraid to post the mistakes. They're also afraid to post longer form content. Like everything has to be under a minute or under 3 minutes or some nonsense like that.
Everybody's got a goldfish brain, a goldfish attention span.
It's terrible. It's terrible for training, and it's just not realistic. It's not good for people's education, and it also gives people this artificial feel for what a flow of training is, which is, again, I said before, it's undramatic, it's slow, it's steady, it's incremental, it's showing up, it's day to day, and and over a long haul. Next thing you wake up and you're like, oh, look at this, I've got a trained dog. But it's not like bang, boom, zap, hey, I'm here, right? All that kind of nonsense. Anyway, off my soapbox on that. That's you touched a nerve.
Yeah, I mean, What made you such a good coach, Michael? How did you learn to become the teacher you are today? Because everyone listens to you, everyone watches your videos, and the reason why is because you're just such a fantastic teacher. What are your top tips to become a really good educator and to be able to explain things in a precise and articulate way that everyone understands? What's your top tips for that?
My top tips are, one, do a little studying of teaching theory. There's lots of resources out there for teachers. This is a well-worn path, right? There are schools for teachers, etc. There are lots of resources for just teaching strategies, right? How to kind of think about breaking your subject down, right? My wife, who's a theater director and actress, went to teaching school before she went to grad school in theater, and she, when she was in teaching school, had this really simple rubric that that they taught in teaching school, which is tell people what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, right? And so I started to begin to go like, at some point I was giving dog training seminars. At first I thought, oh, I'm a dog trainer, so I'm hanging out with a bunch of other dog trainers and talking about dog training. But very quickly in that process, I realized I was a teacher, right? The subject was dog training, but the job was teaching. And so I started to think about how I would organize myself. I started to sit down and come up with a variety of ways to say the same thing. Like, okay, not every way of describing or showing something is going to resonate with everybody. So I need to have 2 or 3 different ways to say the same thing. And I began to kind of organize my thoughts. And then I had the luxury of practicing kind of slowly over time.
Right? Well, you've done so many seminars.
So many seminars.
Right? You've done an unbelievable amount of seminars. I don't know, maybe you've done more seminars in the history of the world, as your president would say.
Yeah. I think oh my God, don't let's not even. I've done at least outside, not counting classes that I taught at the school after I opened the school, but I'm sure I've done 400 seminars, right? Kind of thing outside of that. But the early ones were all me visiting dog clubs. And the traditional seminar at that time was a trainer would come in and everybody in the club would work their dogs and you just give them advice and troubleshoot, right? And so what I found is when I start going around doing that, there were some kind of just general deficits on fundamental skills. So I started to come up with these little presentations that I would give at the beginning of a seminar. So I'd have a little talk on communication or motivation or something like that I would do at the beginning. And then we'd just work dogs and talk about and give advice kind of thing. And what happened is over time, I got to get up in front of a different group of people every week and kind of explain a concept. And I learned what worked and didn't work. And I learned to pay attention to people as I was teaching. And I could see if somebody was confused or not confused. I learned ways to keep them kind of engaged just through trial and error and practice. And gradually I added more presentational material until they were turning into kind of like classes. All right. Instead of just dog work stuff, right, where you were troubleshooting people's dogs for them. So I got to kind of develop it over a longer period of time. And I was traveling to do seminars for 13, 14 years, probably before I opened the school. And so by the time I opened the school, I'd had this whole education in teaching that I got to do, kind of work out all the kinks of on the job, which was a wonderful experience and super helpful for my teaching, right? The other thing is I realized that early on, it's easy to get frustrated with people that aren't kind of getting what you're putting out there, right? And a lot of teachers, a lot of dog trainers that are trying to teach people about the subject of dog training get frustrated and judgy relatively easy. Like, I told you that already. I told you that 3 times already. And I realized that none of that does any service to your education or getting your point across. You have to be willing to repeat the same things over and over and over again with the same enthusiasm and the same lack of judgment that you did the first time, and you're getting frustrated or angry with somebody or short, doesn't help their ability to take on the information at all. So like everybody, sometimes we all go like, come on, man, sometimes, but I've learned to just, I'll say it as many times as I need to say it for it to get home. And I'll say it in as many different ways as possible to try to get through to you. Cause that's our job, right? That's my job, is to get you to understand it. So, and I think the final thing that I would say is, be authentic, like be you. So many people these days through social media and in dog training businesses and other places, they're trying to give people what they think they want, right? And so they're trying to modify their way of being in the world to suit what they think the general vibe is. That's exhausting and unsustainable, and it lacks authenticity. So people can tell. Right? People can tell when you're putting it on versus when you're just being you, right? And you aren't going to appeal to everyone, right? You're just not. Like nobody is. And so you find your tribe a little bit. Like you do you within parameters, right? And you get out there and be true to yourself, and you'll find the right people if you do that. And if you're chasing a style that you think people want to see, to me, it's not fun and it's unsustainable.
All right. How can people find out more about you and learn from you?
So I'm at a little bit of a transition phase in my career. So I just turned 60. About a little over a year ago, I stopped running our full-time in-person trainer school.
That's your Michael Ellis School for dog trainers?
Michael Ellis School trainers, yeah. So I still have the facility, and we lease it to a friend's dog business right now, and I still use it for periodic seminars and things like that. But the full-time, 5-day-a-week, full-blown dog trainer school, I'm not doing. I have an online membership service where all my new content is going. You can see it all at michaelellisschool.com. You can just go to the website and see it there. And the membership is there, where I put recorded versions of all of our previous in-person classes. And I've got webinars and practical tutorials, and that my personal video training journal and seminar recordings and all kinds of stuff in there. And now I'm doing occasional kind of in-person things. Like I just taught this weekend to a group of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management search and rescue trainers. And I just did a workshop for a group of professional dog trainer, franchise dog trainers, trying to help them come up with a program. So I just have like half a dozen times a year, I'll do some kind of seminar teaching thing there. And that's all. You can see when those are happening and where they're happening on the website as well. Yeah.
You're still doing seminars, but you're not doing as many as you used to.
God, no. Yeah. So now when I opened the school, I stopped doing seminars. So for the last 15 years or so, I wasn't doing seminars anymore, because the school was very, very much full time, right? We had a 5-month in-person program called an immersion program that we ran twice a year, plus all kinds of week-long and 2-week-long classes as well. So it was like 70 hours a week, all year kind of thing. And so I wasn't traveling. And one of the impetuses for me to open the school in the first place was to stop traveling all the time, right? And so for a long time, I stopped doing seminars like that. And I did, an occasional conference or things like that. I would go speak at one of those kinds of things, but not the traditional seminars. When I launched the membership again and slowed things down there a little bit, it gives me the opportunity to do seminars kind of when the mood strikes me. So these days I do them, generally speaking, and it's some place that I want to go, or some group that I think would really benefit from what I have to say. So like this last year, I went to Australia and New Zealand, which was lovely because I really dig it down there. So yeah, those kinds of things, but they're not nearly as frequent. I probably do half a dozen a year or so.
So what about the new year? Are there any projects for the new year? Have you got anything secret that you want to tell everybody?
Yeah, so I'm what I've noticed these days, as somebody that's educating a lot of dog trainers, is that there's a big deficit in leash handling skill stuff, right?
Leash handling
So
skills.
leash handling, which is
Okay.
surprising, right? So
Right.
lots of trainers that are coming up in kind of modern dog training paradigms, if we've gotten really good at manipulating dogs without a leash, right? And we're all kind of
With
good
the
at
electric
moving.
collar and the
No, like with food and rewards
right.
and stuff like that, right? So I can get a dog to do a lot of stuff with no leash, no collar, no nothing, right? If I'm good at manipulating dogs with food, et cetera, and toys, and there's lots of things that I do. And so I'm getting these trainers that have like good timing and communication, and they're using rewards really well, and they have really kind of innovative ways of shaping new behavior, etc., but they can't handle a leash. Like they don't know how to use that properly. And there's a lot of subtlety to that. So I have a current project that I'm doing that is kind of a deep dive into all the ways in which we use the leash and introduce it, handle it, the physical mechanics of handling it. And so I'm going to be filming that this spring, and it'll be going into my membership service. It'll be in a part of that. Like with anything new I'm creating right now is just being dumped into the membership service, so you can see whatever it is going on in there. So that's one of the projects that's on my radar right now. The other is I'm trying to come up with some templates for kind of improving the traditional board and train process, right? So I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in the US, there are lots of trainers that offer these board and trains where they take dogs in for training. Right.
Yep. And we have we have a number of franchises that I believe originated in the US that have taken over the market in the UK, and they primarily offer board and train services.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those are they are promising certain types of things in a certain timeline, which is a little bit of one of my missions, and is to abolish that idea that like you can
promise something.
You can promise something in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something ridiculous like that, right? Especially.
Well, we have 2 week and 1 week board trains here.
Yeah.
You know, and it's
it's
what
not
the hell can you accomplish in 1 week or 2 weeks?
Yeah, and you can accomplish some things, but you're not finishing a dog's training by any stretch of the imagination.
Not in the slightest.
Anyway, not even close. And so I'm coming up with some templates that kind of extend the timeline and emphasize kind of fairness and flexibility in terms of how you structure those things, because there's lots of dog training businesses that have those. And so I think if I can influence that world, then I can do a lot to help the well-being. So a lot of dogs, there are lots of people that will just bash that kind of training, but there are people out there that want that. They want somebody to train their dog for them, right?
I don't think there's anything wrong with
100%
trains, training stays, whatever you want to call them. I don't think there's anything wrong with them, as long as they're followed up. Like there's got to be some training of the individual who owns the dog, as well as
it's essential.
The actual training state itself.
And a lot of times
you see with these franchises, you see this. Okay, we're going to train your dog for 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, and then you're going to come to us. You're going to come to us, and you're going to learn from us for half an hour, maybe 2 hours. And then you're going to take your dog back with you, and your dog's going to be perfect, and there's nothing nothing else to it. So, there are definitely problems, and I think that would be brilliant if you could devise some kind of board and train methodology that includes some kind of extra tuition for the owners themselves, rather than just this go-home session and then that's it. See you later. We never see you again.
Yep.
That would be absolutely.
That's kind of what I'm interested in at this stage of my life is finding areas of the dog training community where you could make kind of the biggest impact with your time. And because they're to your point, franchises in these larger companies that have kind of a cookie cutter board and train option, if I can get them to modify that to more time with some better training principles and things like that, then it helps a much wider variety of people. And it kind of, I like to say that a rising tide lifts all boats, right, kind of thing. And so I feel that the better we get that information out to all trainers and the general public, the better it is for dogs and people as we go forward. So I'm always looking for opportunities for segments of the dog training world that where kind of new technique or better, another way of thinking about it, has the largest impact on the most number of dogs and people. So I think that's one of the areas that's an issue for me.
Absolutely. What do you think of the term anthropomorphization? And it's a term I've seen thrown around so much on social media, and what do you think of it?
I think it's a real thing, and it's meaning just describing human traits to animals, right? And I think it's absolutely real, and it has an upside and a downside. The upside is frequently if I'm trying to convey concepts to a person and I'm teaching about dog training, if I put it in human terms, then it tends to resonate. So I can get ideas through to people by anthropomorphizing that might not resonate if I didn't. There's also a danger because dogs and other animals aren't people. And so as soon as we start treating them like little people, then we're in trouble a little bit, right? And so I think all good teachers of dog training do this to some degree because you're trying to find ways to get an idea across to somebody. And most of them will understand them if you put it in human terms. But you have to be aware you're doing it and be careful about the downside, which is, dogs aren't people. And if I expect them to behave like people, or I expect them to think and interact with the world like people, then I'm kind of denying the things that make them uniquely them. And also I'll run up against a lot of difficulties as a result of that. So.
Yeah, I do believe that anthropomorphization, I mean, that's a big word, but I believe that should be the way that we approach dogs, unless there's a reason to differ from that. I think that's the way that we should approach dogs. I think there's too little of that in the dog training world to a large extent. Yeah, I mean, it's a term that goes back to the 1960s Skinnerian behaviorism.
Mm-hmm.
And we went too far in one direction. We went in the direction of completely anthropomorphizing dogs, and now it seems like we're going too far in the opposite direction, which is to say that dogs are these alien creatures, let's say, rather than animals that also have similar or the same emotions as humans have.
Right. Yeah, and I think if we're being accurate, we know that dogs have emotional states. We don't know if they're exactly the same as ours, and we certainly, but we know they have emotional states that approximate ours. They can be afraid, they can be excited, they can be angry, for want of a better term, right? And so I think in scientific communities, people are careful not to say things that we don't know for sure, right? Or that we can't check and test. And some of that stuff is very difficult to quantify. We're getting to places where, we can have brain scans and neurobiological research that helps us infer that. But we don't know exactly what a dog thinks or feels 100%. We have ideas, right, in that circumstance. And so I think the danger lies because if we start to treat them as too similar, is that we begin to disregard the differences too, right? And so I'm with you in that I think that it's not a bad thing that we do that, as long as we have an awareness of its limits, right? And anthropomorphism isn't just a term around Skinnerian stuff. It's been in biology forever. It's any animal. Anytime you ascribe human traits to any other animal, and biologists and scientists have been careful about it. It's a huge criticism for a scientist, because it means you're being biased in what you're looking at. You're making assumptions that are untestable, right? And so I make assumptions about the zebra's motivations for certain things, and I'm getting into fuzzy territory, right? Even if I may be right, it's a highly difficult thing to test in certain cases. So in scientific circles, it's something that you had to be very careful about. And but I think we don't have to be perfectly accurate as dog trainers, right? In the same way, it's like, right. I don't, as long as it helps me understand the dog and make our relationship better, or improve my training, or help me help somebody else help their dog, then if it's a little bit inaccurate, it doesn't matter, right? Whereas for a scientist, if it's a little bit inaccurate, it matters, right? That's not the world in which they live. And so I think the bad connotations come from the scientific world, and there is a trap in there. But I'm with you that on balance, it's not a bad thing, as long as we acknowledge it and acknowledge the things that we don't know for sure too, right?
Yeah, I think it should certainly be the way in which we approach dog behavior should be that, unless proven otherwise, right?
But okay. So for instance, though, that one of the things that would happen, something that's very different about dogs that human beings are not possessed of, is predatory behavior in the same way, right?
Absolutely.
Like these kinds of
that's a situation where we're proved otherwise.
Yeah, there's a very different thing going on there, and recognizing what role that plays in the dog's life. Also, what's the dominant sense, right?
Right.
Like, we move through the world with our eyes primarily, then our ears, right? And olfaction's way down the road for us, right? It exists. We certainly use it. It's a part of our Umwelt as well, which is our kind of worldview and navigation. But dogs, that moves way up the hierarchy. So you have to kind of recognize, I'm looking at this situation as a dog trainer from a human perspective. I'm looking at my eyes, and this is what I see. Does my dog see the same thing? Is their brain focused on it in the same way I am? It's not in a lot of cases. And I think anthropomorphism gets in people's way sometimes when they're generalizing behavior, right? Because they're looking at a situation and saying, like, it's obvious what you're focused on here. It's obvious what the most salient piece of this puzzle is, right? But the dog is coming at it from a different perspective due to their dogness, their Umwelt, their kind of way of moving through the world. And so I think it's important to recognize those things as well, right? And sometimes we don't know, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's cool too. It's part of the fun part about it, right? No matter how long you do this, there's loads to discover, right?
Definitely. Have you heard of him? I'm sure you have heard of him. I don't even know why I'm asking you if you've heard of him. Jack Panskip.
Oh, yeah. Effective neuroscience. Yeah.
There we go. The rat tickler.
Yeah, for sure.
It's he's an interesting one to look into. He's done a lot of research on affective neuroscience and animal emotions. So he's certainly someone that I think everyone should look into.
And here's another perspective to put out there, because I'm somebody that really likes the idea of crossover between the science behind behavior and kind of understanding mechanisms that drive behavior and that kind of world. The theoretical world of dog training, I love that stuff. I find it super fascinating. But dog training at the end of the day is a practical kind of hands-on discipline. And these days, there's a really strong emphasis on science and its role in dog training. And I think it has a place. And I dig it when something that I've seen over the years and I know to be true from a anecdotal perspective because I've watched it happen, when he get a biological explanation for why that happens, when it aligns with the things that you've actually seen with your eyes in training. And I think that's a really cool thing. You're like, oh, that's why that is cool. We've known that it works this way, but here's why, and kind of thing. And I love that. But we do have to be careful to remember that this is a physical craft in which we're directly interacting with another species. And there's lots of practical aspects that strongly outweigh the theoretical stuff. And I see a lot of young trainers now getting bogged down in that end of it. It's not a bad thing if that excites you and likes you, but if it starts to interfere with your direct observation of the animals and your direct interaction with the animals, and if you use it as a substitute for getting in front of dogs and putting your hands on dogs and doing things with dogs, then that doesn't further the actual practical applications of dog training. So we have to be a little bit careful about spending too much time in that world, even though I dig it and I spend a lot of time there now too. But I try to keep that in perspective. And if you're learning about dog training, the more important part is the practical part. Do that part first. The science is a fun place to go. And science can help us recognize kind of when we're beating our head against the wall a little bit sometimes, when we're fighting against biology or something like that, which can help us kind of reconceptualize how we might deal with a problem. But I know lots and lots and lots of highly skilled, very good dog trainers that don't pay any attention to the scientific end of things. And so be aware that that's not a necessity for your dog training journey if it doesn't resonate with you.
Certainly. Michael, thank you for coming on the podcast. Is there anything you'd like to add before we end the podcast?
No, thank you very much. It was a great conversation, a really interesting question. So kudos to you for that, and I really appreciate you inviting me on. I was happy to do it.
I appreciate you coming on, Michael. Okay. Bye, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Super Canine Show with Michael Ellis and me, William Chandler-Duff.